folks, welcome to my today's video. I'm going to share my wisdom or experience, call it as you wish, regarding being hired for technical positions. Honestly, I haven't been hired in a long time. I have been working in a company for probably almost 7 years. Yeah, it's been 7 years. However, I do visit interviews out of curiosity for other companies just to see what they ask of me and not to feel rusty. I also use this experience I get from external interviews to apply to my own interviews that I do inside of my company. So I'm doing technical interviewing. So today I'm going to share with you what you can try to prepare in advance and what can you do to increase your chances of getting hired as technical support specialist. I do not guarantee you that this video is going to help you much directly, but it's going to be a good guide, at least in general and from my perspective. It's always subjective. It depends a lot on what you actually know and what the person wants to hear from you, but otherwise there are a few unwritten and unspoken rules which you need to know about. Well, at first, why technical support? Well, you may think it's something like this, working in a huge data center, or like this, when it's more like this. Yeah, actually in a quite friendly environment with other people like you share interests, you work together as a team. It's a great experience. I'm not going to oversell it to you, but just trust me, working in technical support, if you like IT, if you like speaking to people, is an amazing job. So what do you want to do to actually succeed and get hired at the company you like? Well, at first, the first and foremost, do your homework. If you want to work in a specific company, check the website and the career position description. So let's look at my company, for example. So if I go to my company and careers section, I believe every company has a career web page, and look at technical support, for example, all functions. Now I want to see technical customer support. I see technical support engineer, which seems to be a role which I may try to apply for. And this is where I want to check what's the most important. So I read the whole page and underline that we must know Windows operating system, networking, and as a plus Unix, Linux knowledge and other things. It's also underlined here, Windows OS, networking, business critical applications like Exchange, Active Directory, SQL, and also because it's a virtualization backup company, people would like to see VMware and Hyper-V, but this is a plus. It's not necessary, but it would increase your chances. So what does it mean to know Windows, to know networking and other things? Well, there are quite a few key technology components you must know to say that you know operating systems like Windows, that you know networking, and you might also have to know underlying technologies such as hardware, general knowledge, what is operating system, a program, etc. But I will focus on what seems to be the most expected or the most reasonable to know first. So before we switch to specifics, let's say if you apply to the company and it says, I don't know, FreeBSD is required, and you have no idea what FreeBSD is, it's better for you to take a pause, learn about it, and come back to the interviewing process. Right, so the first thing you do, you determine what are the key factors that are required from you. The second thing you do, you update your resume. So if you know about something that's critical, make sure it's in the beginning, it's easily readable, so that it's visible that you have the skill which is required. If you don't have the skill, do not put it in, because there is nothing as dissatisfactory as prescribing a person, finding a skill, and then figuring out the person doesn't know anything about it. It's going to lower your chances if you put it and you don't know it. You can also put the skills which you barely know, but make sure to mention it, like proficient knowledge usage and beginner knowledge usage. That helps, and that can kickstart a discussion. Also, you don't need to be a master of many years working in such field. What you can do, if you see, for example, that Linux is required, but you have never done anything with Linux, perform a lab work. Consider this as a preparation for university or school hiring process. Let's say it's called examination in the beginning. So read some materials and make sure to set it up at least once, because if you only read the book and you never install specific software operating system, you will miss the most obvious steps that are required to know. For example, what is the file system for Linux, like ext4 by default, what is a root user, how permissions are set. So if you simply make a program work, not necessarily work inside the program, just make it installed and running, that's already a good kickstart for your knowledge. And you'll probably find some problems and questions along the way installing and running it, and this is how you can figure out what is the most important for you to know. Because if you simply read the book, most of the books focus on everything. You cannot fully learn it in a brief period you have before the interview, like a week or 2 weeks. But if you run the program, install it, and you figure out what's going on, you already have enough knowledge to show that you can at least make it work. Besides installation in the lab, you will also want to know 2 key components. One of them is which logs or monitoring tools does the software have, so something that will help you to understand if it's working properly or not. For example, in case of Windows, it would be event logs. In case of Linux, it would be specific system logs. In case of specific application, it would be that application logs, like Microsoft SQL error logs, for example. It's one thing. And the second part of knowledge that you must carry is the tools. Which troubleshooting tools, either native or third party, exist to actually fix issues with the software. In case of Windows, it would be inbuilt task manager, resource monitor, device manager for configuration, etc. So for example, if you are in Windows, you would want to go to start and open all administrative tools and check them. And you would also want to check critical or well-known troubleshooting packages, such as I don't know, for example, systemternals, which contains a lot of different tools, well-known third-party troubleshooting tools like what do we have for Windows? We have a blue screen debugger to check the crash dumps, etc. So you want to know what you would check first, if the software is maybe misbehaving or if it's crashing. When it comes to networking, it's a similar idea. You would want to check how it works, which tool to use. So if you don't know what is a ping or how can you telnet into a port, it's also not going to be much to advantage. So again, knowledge and tools, they come hand to hand. And also, while you think you know that you have set it up at least once, and you also know which tools to use in general, make sure to verify how this software is related to the job that they're going to be doing. So for example, in the case of my company, it's going to be a backup software. So most likely people would want to know about your knowledge of Windows backup and storage systems and network configuration for typical data center setups. If my company would be a programming company, you would likely get questions about API calls or scripting or how the software manages memory. So regarding that, it's very important to know what is the primary focus of the company you are going to work for, to understand how other technologies relate to that. Besides that, one more thing is that you would want to study if the company has its own products. Maybe it sells or supports some products, maybe it has some monitoring tools, other programs, because if you simply check a user guide and demonstrate a simple knowledge of the company product, it already tells the interviewer that you are interested, that you are not coming through 10, 20 interviews, you are focused on joining this company and you actually tried something, and they can also try to gauge or understand how much you have learned in the short time you had, because nobody will expect you to be a specialist in the software that the company develops. If you just apply for the company, they'll know that you looked it up while you're looking for the job. But if you manage to learn quite a few useful, let's say, algorithms of usage or installation steps or troubleshooting steps for that software, that would be impressive. It means that you are a quick learner. It's better than saying, I know how to study, because the phrase itself, I know how to study, I learn fast, doesn't mean anything. You need to demonstrate it, right? So now let's look at what is the most important in 3 key aspects: operating systems, networking, and hardware, because these are always be asked from any position. You could be developer, you could be a support engineer, you could be a salesperson. You need to know how these basic functions work, let's say, because if you don't know how hardware works, if if you encounter a technical person, the discussion is going to be awkward. So I will demonstrate what may be important if you are going to express your knowledge of operating system on the server that we have set up in the previous video, the Hyper-V with Windows 2019. So it's my VMware machine which I'm starting right now and launching the web console. And I just want to show some key aspects around. It's not going to be everything, but it should give you a good idea of what to expect. Of course, don't think that I'm actually telling the questions. The interview can have thousands of questions. I'm just showing you around what you must know for sure and in which direction to develop yourself. So the first thing you notice, this computer has a server manager. So Windows has two types of operating systems, client and server. And some of the operating systems also have this differentiation. So the server version has administrative tools necessary to configure data center. The client is usually something that a single user uses or a client workstation uses. So obviously for hypervisor you need data center server manager type of computer. And in this case, I would simply recommend you to install at least one type of operating system that you want to learn about, that you want to be sure you know about, and go through the specific administrative tools. In case of Windows, in Server Manager, if you click on local server, you'll see quite a few different, let's say, links. There is a section with Windows updates, there is a section with firewall, there are events which you can also look up in the event viewer, and there are also configuration options. So if you go, for example, to disks, you can check your disks and configure them. You can see which partition they have, if they're clustered or not, what is the type of the bus. So if you look at anything like this just briefly and you notice that you have no idea about some abbreviation, look it up. It's going to help. It's not necessarily going to help you directly on the interview, but you would want to know this at least to make sure you are not getting a question about something you don't know at all. Also, if you go to the roles and features here, manage roles and features, you'll see a selection of different roles you can enable: DHCP, DNS, Active Directory, and network controller, remote desktop, etc., web server, IS. So make sure that you at least understand what these roles mean. If you would be considering some kind of Linux operating system which can be used to the server, check which analog does it have, what kind of mail server does it have, what kind of integration which is not Active Directory does it have, like LDAP. How do you install and configure DHCP and DNS? So the most basic roles must be known to you, like DHCP for IP address assignment, DNS for name resolution, etc. And if you expand file services, you also see that there are quite a few extra services for Windows, such as iSCSI target, DFS replication, data deduplication. We touched upon this briefly in my training video about data structure, but these are all features that are used commonly in most of data centers. So you should at least know what each of these topic means. Not necessarily the full configuration, versioning and everything, but at least understand what is DFS replication, what is data duplication, what is a branch cache. That's the primary thing I would mention. The second thing is tools, right? I mentioned tools. So in case of Windows, you can actually replace the knowledge of many third-party tools with the knowledge of PowerShell, because Windows PowerShell is a very powerful tool. If you start it up as administrator, you can actually configure the whole system in many aspects. You can test connectivity to the ports, you can check disk, you can install and install packages, you can check system for the health. Right, you have a lot of different options here. I don't have that domain controller start here, but this would be checking a directory, Active Directory controller. Typically, you would want to at least know your way around the PowerShell. The PowerShell can actually be a replacement for many tools you may already know. So by default, you can use all the command line, CMD, commandlets, like programs that you would normally use, like ping, tracer, ipconfig. Right? You can use all of these in PowerShell, and it also has a lot of modules which come by default and which you can install. So it can replace a lot of native and third-party tools. For example, test net connection. This one can replace you ping, telnet, and a few other tools like port query at the same time. Also, there are a few notable commands that you must know. So I would say netstat, netsh, and a few other like basic things relevant to networking. So you would basically be able to fix a problem if you cannot ping one computer through the DNS name or something, or if your software cannot connect to the port. And to actually properly answer questions when it comes to networking, you must have an idea about OSI model. So what happens on IP level, which means that you need to know what is a subnet mask, how does masking work, how does gateway work, what is broadcast, multicast, singlecast when the signal is sent. And you also need to go deeper. So you need to know what happens on transport layer, like what is the difference between TCP UDP, how does the connection on port work, and why do you need ports in the first place? So typically to separate connections, right? What is encapsulation? So these are, let's say, basic instructions that you will see in any networking course. However, it's very important to understand how it works, and if people are interested, they can make a separate video about networking. But so far, just remember that you need to at least know what is OSI model, how does connection work on IP and on TCP layer, because these are the most common levels used by applications, and which tools can you use to check and troubleshoot connection. I'll probably make separate videos for single tools like port query, etc., and even for this testnet connection command line. Now, this is about the general tools. You also would want to go to administrative tools. So if you go to start administrative tools, you'll see quite a few tools such as event viewer, defragmentation, computer management, what else, resource monitor, services, system configuration. So open each of them. By simply opening them, you're not going to hurt your computer. So it's safe to open any of them, like component services. And this is where you should be sure that you know at least what's going on. For example, a lot of people have no idea what is DCOM, DCOM, or COM+. And actually, if you would see COM errors, you would have no idea what's going on unless you know what it is. So this is something that is useful to learn about when you talk about Windows. Also, the event viewer is something that they use as logs. So there are main different log types. It's application, security, and system, and each of them hosts different kind of information. And you can also look at the global custom view administrative events, and this is where the errors and warnings get captured from all the other views. So this is the view useful to check if you want to see which errors popped up most of the time. However, if you want to go to specific view, it will also show you the specific type of log. It will show you informational messages, which can also be important. So it's not necessary that you don't have an error and everything is fine. The informational message could be a problem, like something stopped unexpectedly, or user clicked something UI, which will explain why something stopped working. So these are the typical logs you must know how to browse, and it's not that hard. You just click on specific time and source where it comes from, and you see the description. For example, let's look at any of the errors I have just for that. Network list manager reports no connectivity to the internet, right? So I don't have network connection to internet here. This error, DHCP, which is supposed to give me IP address. It says your computer wasn't assigned address from network. For the network card with network address, network error occurred. Your computer will continue to try and obtain address. And now you could look up 0x79 to get more information about this error. But typically my computer right now is not connected to a proper network with DHCP, so of course I don't have a proper IP address. So these are all the events that are sometimes checked by third-party monitoring tools, but it is enough if you can learn them by yourself. You don't need any third-party tool knowledge. You can just study these events and find out what's happening. I can also export them to CSV, and it will save them in an Excel-like format, which you can read on any machine, because one thing you need to know about the events is that if you don't have a component, like for example the HTTP client, which is unlikely, but let's say, you'd be unable to read the text of the event. You would have to read the event on the computer which has the component. But if you export as CSV, it will export the event as a text, so it will not use a software-specific error code, so you can read it on any computer, right? What else? Well, one more thing you definitely need to know is what's happening in your computers. If you go to this PC on my computer, you'll see your volumes, disks, and even a simple question, what is volume C, can be problematic if you dig deeper. So you need to know the difference between volumes and hard disks, so it's a logical volume. You need to know which file systems are supported. For example, if I decide to format it, right now I can't because it's system volume, but it will give me a selection of FAT, FAT32, NTFS, and DFS file systems. You would at least need to know what different types of file systems are out there and why would you want to pick one or another. You would also want to figure out what is a partition type, for example, GPT or MBR. So these questions that kind of natural to anybody who worked in IT for many years may be unknown to you. So I'm just giving you hints. If you hadn't have an experience, it's better to say in the interview that you have installed it in a lab and you don't have an experience, but this is what you learned. You can even try to carry on with the conversation and explain yourself what you have studied. And it may be impressive that you learned so much in a short period of time if it's something that is suitable for the job. Because if in reality you do not know enough for the job at all and you get hired, it's going to hurt you more than make it easy for you. It depends on what is actually the entry level of the job position. Right? So it's better to show your knowledge but not hide it. And to show your involvement, the best way to show your involvement is to actually prepare for specific technology knowledge, as I said. Now, what else? Well, if it comes to hardware, honestly, you just need to know what is CPU, RAM, hard disk, and motherboard components, how they connect to each other, how you can check them in the device manager, and what does it mean. So if you open, for example, device manager and administrative tools, let me find it. It should be part of the computer management. Yeah. For example, you might want to know what all these devices you have here mean. I mean, display adapter is probably obvious. It's like video card, disk drive too. But if you open, for example, a controller, like, what is the IDE controller, right? This is a specific, let's say, chipset and let's say smaller component and device of the motherboard, which translates your IDE cable of the hard disk signals into the universal signals on the bus. So it's like a translator. Typically controllers, translators, they adapt external cables to work with motherboard, right? Well, this is something that you may not have known and you would have a question about controller, right? So typically this is something that is important to know, just at least in the field of functionality. And if you are talking about CPU, RAM, and hard disk, you may want to know what affects the performance, because it's also a common question. Like, what makes CPU better or worse? How do you compare to RAM sticks? How do you compare to hard disks? And also the most common configuration. Let's say, what is the benefit of dual RAM? How can you combine disks? What are the RAID types from 0 to 5 at least? So these are seemingly simple setup questions, maybe something that you haven't studied yet or you haven't explored. So at least make sure you understand the basic setup concepts, and then you can spin up the discussion there. Finally, none of this is going to help you much if you answer briefly without explanation of your own opinion about something. So the question is simple, like what is a CPU? You can say it's central processing unit, right? And that's it. But if you also explain that it's a specific piece of hardware which does the calculations, which has a cache, it can be 32-bit or 64-bit, this simple addition to your answer alone is going to increase opinion about you highly. So try to give extended answers, but not overextend, right? So you need to maintain the balance. You need to give a chance for the interviewer to ask you, but do not answer too briefly. Because honestly, what happens to me often when I'm questioning in person, when they give a detailed explanation like this, it often covers 3 or 4 questions. So it shortens the interview and makes me feel more comfortable about not asking too much in the area which is clearly known to the person, right? So you can demonstrate your knowledge if you give not just precise answers, but extended answers. And finally, there is no guaranteed solution, but don't be afraid to go on the interviews just to test your own skills. For example, if you have a company like Microsoft or my company, for example, Vim or some other company that you really want to work for, and you're not sure about the skills that I need, check the website, check the description, see the roles, and then you can do a couple of test interviews before you apply for the real one. You can go to a smaller company you're less interested with, or you can ask your friends who maybe experience interviews there, what were the common questions in the areas and what do you need to know, right? So for example, if you apply to our company and you need to know Windows, you can try an interview for any other Windows-based company. You can also study the videos of people, of trainers in the specific topic. For example, I do these brief videos just to make sure you don't get bored, but there are people who expand on the topics. There are websites like CBT Nuggets, so you can use them as a resource too. So in short, to summarize the video, study the most critical knowledge points from the job description, set it up and test it at home or in the lab. You can also use my video about AWS to see how you can easily get access to a Linux machine or any other Windows box, for example, without running it at home. After you install it, make sure you verify that you know the most basic functionality, such as default logs and administrative tools that come with the software, and you know how to check the basic problems using either integrated or third-party tools. Besides that, make sure you understand what is the relationship between the key technology mentioned with the company activity. So why do they need this technology? It should help you to direct yourself to the correct study direction. And finally, when you are on the interview, make sure that your resume is up to date and includes the key technology that you know. Make sure not to include something you don't know at all. And if you don't know it well, mention that it's basic knowledge. And finally, give detailed answers. Otherwise, you may have a lot of follow-up questions which can bog you down, which can be unnecessary if you give a proper detailed answer about specific technology. If you do plan to apply for some position, I am actually interested to share more with you, so you can make requests for personal coaching. I can give you some advice in areas that you would like to know, at least if I know these areas. I'm not going to give you advice in something that I haven't studied. So if it's about Windows, networking, Linux, hardware, virtualization, backups, if it's from these typical areas, you can ask me directly and I'll try to run you through the interview. And it's not a problem for me, it's a practice. And for you, maybe it's going to be something that changes your mind. So leave your questions below the video. I'll be happy to hear any comments from you, and otherwise I'm going to go to bed because it's a bit late. I was just going to record this video for some good, hopefully, and I wish you to pass whatever challenges await you, to actually win them, and I wish you a great day, and don't be afraid to try. It's all honestly trial and error, so the more you try, the more you know. If you don't do it, you will never know. So Godspeed.